My name is Ann Albert. I'm the Klatt Family Director for Public Programs here at the Herbert D. Katz Center for Advanced Judaic Studies at the University of Pennsylvania. I'm here to kick off and welcome you to the second program in our series on health and healing, trauma and healing in contemporary Israel that we at the Katz Center are co-presenting in a three-way partnership with the Weizmann National Museum of American Jewish History and the Keren Center for Jewish Civilization, in turn together with Tel Aviv University and ANU, the Museum of the Jewish People. So these three, or rather 5 institutions, are all devoted to understanding Jewish culture in various modes and contexts. And we've come together in this project for this series to explore contemporary issues related to health and medicine in Israel. Professor Keren Friedman-Peleg is a senior lecturer at the College of Management Academic Studies in Israel. Hi, Keren. Thank you for joining us. She's a medical and psychological anthropologist who carries out research that combines clinical questions of security-related trauma diagnosis, treatment, and prevention with socio-political questions of national belonging and inequality, and more. She was a fellow here at the Katz Center twice before, in 2015-16 and again in 2019-20, both of which times I had the pleasure of being her colleague here, and served as well as an Israel Institute Fellow here and has remained a friend of the Katz Center over these years. She's also served as a visiting assistant professor in UC Berkeley's Department of Anthropology and Helen Diller Institute for Jewish Law and Israel Studies. She's the author of a book that came out in 2017 called PTSD and the Politics of Trauma in Israel, and many related articles. You can find a lot of her work if you just search online, and has, I understand, a second monograph under contract with Penn Press. So we look forward to seeing that when it comes out. And since October 7th has been working on the project that I believe we're going to hear more about today. So Keren, thank you so much for being here. It's lovely to see you.
Thank you so much for having me, Anne, and for this very kind introduction. I must say I had the huge privilege to be a fellow at the Katz Center, as you said, twice, and it was such a meaningful and powerful experience. So to be here today really means a lot, and especially during this very, very tense days in Israel when our hostages have started to return back home after too many days in captivity. So thank you for this opportunity. I will open by saying a few words about my fieldwork in the aftermath of October 7th and about those who survived Hamas attack and with whom I met and listened to. Then, in the second part of my talk, I will provide a definition, hopefully clear enough, of the theoretical lens that has shaped my analysis of what I've heard and what I've seen, what we call in anthropology meaning making. And right after that, in the third and final part of my talk, I will offer some ethnographic examples, the voices, the experiences of those who survived October 7th. And just to say the obvious, I will be more than happy, and it's important to me to hear your thoughts and questions, as this is very much a work in progress. So basically, I think it would be quite fair to say that from the very beginning of my academic career as an anthropologist, something like 20 years now, I've been studying trauma and resilience in the context of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and naturally, especially in the region of the Gaza envelope. Back at the time, I conducted a fieldwork at two leading NGOs, Natal, the Israel Trauma Center for Victims of Terror and War, and the ITC, Israel Trauma Coalition, both established as a response to the outbreak of the Second Palestinian Intifada. And then I basically have been studying different aspects of trauma and resilience during all the escalations on the border of Israel and Gaza, with the constant rocket fire and the military operations launched by the IDF over the years in Gaza. But nothing had prepared me for the morning of October 7th. Like many Israelis, I found the Hamas attack to be shocking. And I think it was during the evening of that day that I understood that a new unprecedented chapter of my fieldwork about trauma and resilience had begun. It was after I received a text message from one of my previous informants. She basically provided me with some information about what happened on her kibbutz earlier that day. So if to try and summarize, in the months and the weeks and months after October 7th, I conducted in-depth interviews, dozens in-depth interviews with survivors of Hamas attack, especially members of kibbutzim from the Gaza envelope region, such as Kfar Aza, Nir Oz, Kisufim, and Magen. You will hear about some of them in a few minutes. In addition, I conducted participant observations at social gatherings like funerals, discussion circles, rallies, art exhibitions, and more. And finally, I visited at the kibbutzim that were severely affected by Hamas attack. And I would like to share with you two images in a minute, because it was during these visits in the kibbutzim that I suddenly spotted this house, for example. This is a house at Kibbutz Kfar Aza with only a menorah. I hope you can see it. I circled it. Only a menorah on one of its destroyed walls. And I took a picture immediately. And one of my colleagues asked me, "What are you doing?" And I told her, somehow it feels important to see this menorah in this specific context. And then I spotted another interesting combination. Here you can see a wall with multiple bullet holes, but with two shelves full of books. And believe me, I analyzed these two shelves. There are books about Jerusalem, about Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin, the Zohar, and a Bible. And I think that observing these houses, taking these pictures, I've become aware of the fact that it was not only the ruined houses that I saw. It was not only all that was lost and destroyed, but also what was remained, and what the survivors, those who guided my visits, wanted me and others like me to acknowledge that did survive Hamas brutal attack. In other words, it was not only the desecrated houses they asked me to see, but also the sacred, like one menorah and one Bible in two shelves full with books. And then came, of course, what people were saying to me, because alongside material objects, menorah, Bible, they were the particular, at times surprising ways through which survivors communicated what happened to them on October 7th. So it's not only the material objects, but also the way those who survived Hamas attack asked to deliver the horrors to us, to all of us who weren't there, but are willing to listen. And please allow me to share with you what I've heard from a member of Kibbutz Kfar Ha'aza. His son-in-law and eldest granddaughter were murdered on October 7th, while his daughter and 3 grandchildren were kidnapped and taken to Gaza. And very early in our conversation, he looked at me and said, the entire time my daughter and her children were in Gaza, I saw before my eyes the book of Jonah. I say to myself, I'm like Jonah, floating between sky and water, weightless. I don't know who I am, and I don't know where they are, and I have nothing to hold on to. Another member of the same kibbutz, that his daughter was brutally murdered in her apartment in the same kibbutz along with her spouse. When I asked him about the ways through which he tried to process his trauma and to cope with what happened. And he said, you know, not so far from our kibbutz used to live Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. And when Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai realized that the siege of Jerusalem would lead to the destruction of the city and of the temple, he said, just give me Yavne and its sages. It means he took action. And this is exactly what we need to do from now on, to focus on doing. So maybe I'm over dramatic here, even though nothing feels too dramatic when it comes to October 7th and the war in Gaza. But during my visits in the kibbutzim, and while listening to the stories survivors shared with me, the theoretical lens of meaning making seemed especially relevant and especially important in my anthropological effort to understand what they went through and the way through which they have been processing their trauma, and no less important, the ways through which they have been trying to bounce back and move forward. So I felt like a unique type of meaning making was emerged, calling on Jewish sources, collective narratives, and the power of faith to mold what many of the survivors saw as unbelievable and unimaginable into familiar, highly acceptable idioms and images of distress. In the face of the horrors, many of them still cannot understand how did it happen to us in our homes, inside our kibbutz in Israel. So in the face of the unbelievable and the unimaginable, they have been using familiar idioms and images of distress, all connected to their Jewish identity. And right before concluding this second part of my talk, I will say that I found this type of meaning making to be especially interesting, at times even surprising, given the fact that many of those who survived Hamas attack are members of kibbutzim. Please just allow me to share with you this map. So you can see here kibbutzim like Erez, Mefalsim, Kfar Aza, Nachal Oz, Be'eri, Re'im, Kisufim, Nirim, Nir Oz. These are basically small agriculture-based communities that over the years have come to embrace secularism as a crucial part of their social identity. It means that approaching Jewish sources, reading them, learning from them, thinking through them about their daily struggles and concerns were not an integral part of their daily life. As someone who was born and raised on kibbutz, I know very well that our entire life, our parents and our educators try to convince us to find other sources of meaning, other texts that can be useful in our effort to understand the social reality around us. So what we have here is a very unique group that was the main target of Hamas attack. And before diving in, I will just want to share with you that when I asked a member of Kibbutz Kfar Aza, her son was killed very early in the morning of October 7. When I asked her about the recovery process of her as an individual, as a mother, but also about the recovery process of her community, she said, I think that part of what happened to us is that we neglected our Jewish sources. By distancing ourselves from the Jewish world, we got screwed up. In Hebrew, nidfaknu, screwed up, because we were left without roots and without anchors, without something to hold on to. Israel and Zionism are relatively new phenomena, but Judaism, this is where our roots and anchors are. So after offering hopefully a clear enough definition of what I mean by meaning making and why I found this specific type of meaning making to be of a particular interest, I would like to share with you some ethnographic examples of what survivors were trying to obtain by calling on Jewish sources as a crucial component of their meaning making in the aftermath of October 7, what survivors were trying to obtain by integrating Jewish sources into their meaning making in the aftermath of Hamas attack. And this will be the third and final part of my talk. So I think that what stood out to me as the first goal is their efforts, survivors' efforts, to offer some answers to the key question of how can we, survivors, explain to ourselves and to others what happened that day. I think that they have been struggling with this specific question for a long time. And I think that Jewish-oriented idiom and images of distress have come to play a crucial role in addressing this question, because I think that what Jewish sources allow is this task of anchoring or rooting. Basically, what I've heard over and over again is how survivors narrate October 7th as a contemporary manifestation of collective struggles from both the recent and the more distant Jewish past. And I would like to share with you two examples of this effort to create order out of the horrors. Here is the story of a member of Kibbutz Kfar Aza, a social worker. She survived Hamas attack together with her husband and one of her children. And this is how she described their very, very long hours inside the safe room. She said, shortly after we entered the safe room, I heard shouts of Allahu Akbar. And my first thought was, they are so stupid, so stupid. In a minute, our soldiers will hear them. After an hour or so, I realized that this time we are the stupid ones. There was no one, not even one soldier to hear them. We were the only ones who heard them. We were inside the safe room for 21 hours. We lay there, curled up, without breathing, without speaking, without food, without water, in complete passivity. I said to myself, we are like the Jews who hid in the woods while the Nazis were looking around with dogs, looking for them. And all of this is happening in my house, in our kibbutz, inside Israel. I cannot understand it. It was not only the Holocaust, even though the Holocaust, for sure, has served a crucial role in narrating October 7th. So please allow me to share with you just another example. Another member of Kibbutz Kfar Aza, he didn't describe their long hours inside a safe room, but rather those moments when they were evacuated by Israeli soldiers from the safe rooms and into the kibbutz gate. He said, they started gathering us. They were some with small children, with strollers, older people, walking with a walking stick, something like 60, 70 people. And we started at 2:30 in the morning, a march. 40 soldiers on one side, 40 soldiers on the other. At some point, I turned to one of the officers and asked, shouldn't you cover the eyes of at least some of us? There are children here. He tells me, not now, but be prepared. At the gate of the kibbutz, there is a pile of bodies. So the soldiers were walking in front of us, making sure there was no shooting, and then telling us to move forward. Up in the sky, it's full of missile interceptions. I felt as if we were crossing the sea in the exodus from Egypt. That was the image I had in my mind. But when I later describe it as the exodus, another kibbutz member argued with me. He said, no, not the exodus. We went on the death march. And before I'm moving to the second and last bunch of ethnographic examples, please just allow me to say something. The next slide, I hesitated to bring, like I wasn't sure myself that this is the most accurate analysis, but I do want to say that since October 7th, the Holocaust has become a cultural idiom of distress. For many, many years, the Holocaust served as a layer of protection, as a moral justification for the establishment of Israel as a Jewish state, for the military power obtained by Israel over the years. But I sense that since October 7, something dramatic happened. And the Holocaust has been used by survivors as an idiom of distress, number one, for emphasizing the brutality of Hamas attack, and number two, to emphasize the fact that the promise of never again had been broken. So the assumption that what happened to us as Jewish people in other places and other times in history would never happen again in a Jewish state, this assumption is no longer valid from survivors' point of view. And just a final quote in this aspect, as one of my informants said, the main problem of October 7 is that we were alone, 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 alone. I will move to the second goal I believe survivors asked to obtain by integrating Jewish sources into their meaning making. And I believe that it was their efforts to address the question, why did we survive? And our neighbors and friends didn't. As one of the survivors told me, what happened on October 7th was a Russian roulette. One house was burned to the ground. Another house just next to it didn't suffer any damage. Here the family was murdered. From there they were kidnapped, and we somehow survived. Why? And I think that here what Jewish sources or approaching Jewish sources allow survivors is to invoke spirituality. In my conversations with survivors, many of them framed specific events that are beyond reason as miracles, those as reflecting the power of faith. And just to remind you, these are secular communities that embraced secularism as a crucial part of their social identity. So I will just share here two, I think, fascinating examples, and then I will conclude my talk. So here is the story, of course, I edited it, of the Keren family. This is how Keren shared with me the story. At 9:30 on October 7th, we heard knocking at the door of the house. My husband holds the handle of the safe room door, and I begin with my prayers a friend taught me, Shema Israel, and respond to me that happiness and a generous spirit will strengthen me. I was into saying these prayers very much, and suddenly the knocking stopped. We kept hearing the shooting bullets and the shouting in Arabic, but the knocking stopped. After more than 24 hours, we decided to open the door of the safe room, and we couldn't understand where we were. There was no house. And Etty sent me the picture they took, and I'm going to share it with you. Here it is, the house from their point of view, why they opening the door of the safe room. And she said, our whole house collapsed, but we managed to survive. And I would like to say, without complicating things too much, but I've noticed that while spiritual framing of personal stories, like the story of the Keren family, are accepted as legitimate and even empowering, a similar framing of communal stories sparked tension and controversy. And here I will move to my final ethnographic example, and I'm about to share with you the story of Kibbutz Magen. Kibbutz Magen is basically a very close neighbor of Kibbutz Nir Oz. I guess some of you have heard about the loss and grief and destruction in Kibbutz Nir Oz. But please, and forgive me for this technical presentation, but just to show you the numbers. In Kibbutz Nir Oz, 38 were murdered, 77 were kidnapped and taken to Gaza, and there is mass destruction to houses and infrastructures. In Kibbutz Magen, right next to Kibbutz Nir Oz, only 2 were murdered, and I'm not trying to minimize it, but you can see the differences. Several were injured, no one was kidnapped, and no damage caused to houses or infrastructures. For weeks, as an anthropologist, I was trying to understand what exactly happened there. And quite soon, it became clear that what we have here is 2 competing framing of the story, or 2 competing explanations of the fact that the damage to the kibbutz, to Kibbutz Magen, was so minimal. To the first explanation, I was exposed short time after October 7th. It was the story of the kibbutz Civil Security Scout, a group of kibbutz members that under the leadership of the kibbutz civil security coordinator, Baruch Cohen, fought Hamas terrorists. When I met Baruch at the hospital, he was in the middle of his rehab process. He shared with me what happened that day from his point of view. On Saturday morning, suddenly I heard explosions. I thought, wow, the IDF must have killed Yihya Sinwar. Well, I took my rifle and told Mina, my wife, to go inside the safe room and lock herself inside. I served in my role as the kibbutz civil security coordinator for 24 years, and I've never told her something like this. And then when I go up to the kibbutz swimming pool, I see below 3 Toyota vehicles, 4 motorcycles, and something like 30 to 40 terrorists. Now what? We fought alone for hours and without any help from the IDF. We blocked waves of terrorists and didn't allow them to reach the kibbutz houses. And we did all of this while seeing kibbutz Nir Oz, right next to us, on fire, literally on fire. Short time after I learned about the heroic fight of Baruch and the other members of the kibbutz, I've become aware of the fact that at least some of the kibbutz members believe that another factor had also contributed to their survival. This is how one of the kibbutz members shared with me her belief that it was also another factor in play. She told me a year ago, a year before October 7th, a man came here with talit and shofar. He went up to the kibbutz swimming pool and said, I want to blow the shofar as a blessing because a year from now, a great disaster will happen to you here, and I want to protect you. I looked at her and couldn't believe it, and she looked at me back and said, by God, I swear. Before asking Baruch, the kibbutz civil security coordinator, about the shofar story, I was quite sure he's going to dismiss it as a complete fake. To my surprise, he said, it's true. And I even obtained a picture for you of the guy while he was blowing the shofar. And he shared with me this picture. And of course, I will be sharing it with you. Here it is. But then, while both of us looking at this unbelievable picture, he said, listen, to say that thanks to the blowing of the shofar, the Holy Spirit rested on the kibbutz and protected us, no, I cannot accept this. What happened on October 7th is that we created an ethos of heroism. The Battle of Magen will be learned by generations to come. So please allow me to conclude by quoting the American anthropologist Clifford Geertz. Geertz basically encourages us to focus on the cultural dimension of religion. He asked us to consider religion to be a system for ordering and framing the world. And this is where I started to find at least the first insights about what I've heard and what I've seen, I think that in the face of massive trauma, and no less important, maybe even more important, the feeling of being betrayed and abandoned by the state, by the state and by the IDF, Jewish sources offer the most reliable and valid means for ordering and framing the horrors of October 7th, because they allow survivors to create some certainty, some clarity in a reality full of uncertainty. And second, because they allow survivors to invoke the sacred as an antidote to the desecrated, all that has been lost and destroyed. Okay, so these were some of my thoughts and some of the voices and experiences I've been exposed to in the last year and almost a half. So I stopped the share screen, and I'm open, more than open, to any insights or question.
Thank you so much, Keren. This is such powerful material, and we've heard you for 35 minutes. I'm sure that this past year of encountering this material constantly has also been a very powerful and intense experience for you. So we'll proceed with the knowledge that we all may have emotions around this. I want to, so we have a bunch of questions already. The first set that I want to connect with are around this central theme of people embracing religious stories, or particularly Jewish collective memory or Jewish stories. One question is, how did people who, are we primarily talking about people who were not considering themselves very religious, or who didn't think in terms of
to say the least, to say the least.
Yeah, so can you say more about that transition for them, and whether they have a kind of self-awareness about this embrace of religion? Do they have complex emotions about using this trove of sources?
I would say, first of all, that I myself was born and raised on kibbutz for many, many years, embracing secularism and pushing against any practice that has some connection to biblical verses, to rabbinic texts, was really pushed aside and considered to be very marginalized in our daily life as kibbutznikim. When, for example, when we celebrate Pesach or Hanukkah, there was this phrase of, we are going to do this the kibbutznik way, meaning to emphasize specific cultural themes while pushing aside, sometimes completely eliminating certain aspects. And I think that what happened after October 7th is that those very secular survivors returned to the Jewish sources. Some of them met them for the very first time. I remember that I was invited to a religious ritual of Kibbutz Kfar Aza, something with Sefer Torah, etc. And I told myself, no one is going to attend. It will be empty. I will sit in an empty room. And the room was packed. And as one of my informants told me, I've never felt so Jewish in my life. So I think that right now, it's not like they are going to be more religion in their daily life, but in a way, they approaching this layer in their collective identity, the fact that we are Jewish, and they have been trying to use those sources as a way of framing the events and making some order. And in that sense, if before October 7th, when we celebrate Pesach, we used to think how we are going to emphasize our own kibbutznik values. After October 7th, this is no longer the guiding principle to emphasize our kibbutznik values, but rather the guiding principle is how we are going to use the materials connected to Pesach in order to address some of the key questions, in order to process some of our concerns and some of our struggles. So I think this is the main difference in regard, to these secular communities before and after October 7th. I'm not sure I answered the question, but.
No, you did. And I have two follow-ups that have already been submitted to. So one is, you started to answer that these same people who are turning to these resources and stories to make meaning are not necessarily becoming more religious in their daily life. Are there ways in which this kind of new relationship to the religious content of Judaism is changing the way that they live? And what resources or teachers or sects of movements of Judaism are they turning to in order to facilitate, right? So are they finding Chabad resources? Are they finding particular rabbis who are coming to meet them and teach them? How is this all playing out?
It was interesting to notice that a very close collaboration was created between the Reformic movement in Israel and those kibbutzim communities, and it was interesting because, in one of the kibbutzim, this April was the first time that they read the traditional version of the Haggadah, the first time. And I remember that I asked, so why are you going this year to read the traditional version? And the first answer was because one of the families that their daughter was kidnapped to Gaza, she just returned last week, they asked that we will read the traditional version of the Haggadah. But then it turned out it's more than one family asking to read the traditional version of the Haggadah, but rather there is an effort, and it also was, in another kibbutz, an effort to reconsider and even to reshape the kibbutznik version of the Haggadah. So this was one practice I've neglected to mention today, but rethinking and then sometimes reshaping practices like reading the Haggadah is also something that I've encountered several times with several communities.
That's really fascinating. So a kind of complementary follow-up question is about whether you see survivors having found meaning or made meaning using non-Jewish resources. So universal human values or new age spirituality, pop psychology, is that also in there?
No, thank you so much for this question, because when I prepared this presentation, I really wanted to include a fascinating example of combining Jewish sources with other cultural sources. There was a beautiful event organized for one of the hostages that returned from Gaza last year. She's an older woman from one of the kibbutzim, and she asked her grandchildren to include the song written by Rabbi Shlomo Carlebach, Leman Achai Vere'ai, for my brother and sisters. And they said, of course, Grandma, we are going to include this song. And then they offered her, and she accepted, to perform this song, and right after that, to perform a gospel song and the song of Imagine by John Lennon. So we were there at the Hostages Square in Tel Aviv. And this cross-cultural gathering is just happening in front of my eyes when Rabbi Shlomo Carlebach has been performed alongside a gospel song and John Lennon. So yeah, and I think that it was exactly what they were trying to obtain, to emphasize not only the Jewish aspect of our brothers and sisters in captivity, but also the more universal human experience of agony and suffering and concerns.
That actually leads well into another question that that was submitted about empathy. The question is something like, it seems like sharing people's stories, talking about what happened, sharing trauma, is a way to help create empathy. And is there a role for that in this process for survivors, empathy for more broadly for not only survivors of this this event, or as a kind of universal experience? Is that not where people are?
I would say like two things. I think that there is the desire of the survivors to represent their trauma in a way that others like you, like me, people inside Israel, but also people outside of Israel, from Jewish communities, but also from other communities, would understand. So this is basically a battle for empathy. And the second thing I will say is that right now, and I don't feel like I'm saying something political, but just to be honest, there is a constant feeling among survivors, among bereaved parents, among those who their family members are still in Gaza, that there is a lack of empathy from the Israeli leadership. And of course, the fact that there is a lack of empathy makes this this effort to obtain empathy, to demand empathy, even more urgent than in other times. But there is a moral crisis in Israel, and this is part of the issue and part of why, in the face of the absence of the state and the absence of the IDF, what we have left is our Jewish sources as I said, the most reliable source of comfort and meaning and empathy.
And they might be a way of connecting across divides with other Jews that are.
Yeah.
We're almost out of time. So I think I'm sorry, I won't get to every question, and I know people are still submitting them, so I really do apologize. But one that I want to bring is the question of distance from the events. So some of these examples of making meaning that you brought are related much later, but related as if the meaning was in the moment. They already had the meaning as they were processing the event, even while they were in the safe house or while they were during the march. So what is the role of chronological temporal distance from a traumatic event in creating such meaning? Is distance needed, or how do you deal with this issue of temporality in your work?
It's a challenging issue for sure. I can say that the three main communities that affected severely by Hamas attack, I mean the kibbutzim communities of Kfar Aza, Be'eri, and Nir Oz, still struggling with questions of commemoration, of what to do with all those, ruined houses, burnt houses, time after time. I hear from survivors that they refuse to allow the kibbutz to destroy their house, because for them it's like someone told me, this is my little Auschwitz. No one is going to erase Auschwitz. So I think that there is like moments of meaning making. I was there indeed in a very early stage. I still continue to be there as an anthropologist, especially in order to understand the politics of memory, what we are going to commemorate and how. So I will need more time to figure it out, but what is going on with the meaning-making process over time.
It will continue to evolve for sure.
Yeah.
And as we wrap up, and thank you very, very sincerely for doing this work and for bringing it to us today, I will just add that your last comments here set up very nicely for another event that the Cat Center is putting on, but sadly only in person. So those who are in Philadelphia could come in a week's time. February 6th, here at Penn, we have an Israeli scholar who's talking about the dilemmas of collective memory and commemoration of October 7th. So these exact problematics of how to deal with ongoing trauma and try to commemorate at the same time. That's taking place next week, and you'll find information on our website. Setting that aside though, Keren, turning back to you, thank you. This has really been eye-opening, and we thank you.
Thank you so much for having me, Anne.